Dzień dobry, cześć, witamy z powrotem. Welcome from Poland again. So now we are moving from the business perspective into legal one that is must have if you want to run any business connected or based on AI. For those who just joined us, my name is Zaneta Lucka-Tomczyk. I'm Women in AI Ambassador in Poland and Program Director at Orange Polska. And today we are talking about how to become AI ready. Now we will have a panel concerning legal perspective. So if you have any questions, you can put them on the chat. On the chat, there are our two members, Anya and Ola, and they are manage all questions if you will put them, of course. And let's move to the point, to my two wonderful speakers, AI expert, Dr. Gabriela Bar. She is AI lawyer and managing partner at Szostek Bar and Partners. Hello, Gabriela.
Hello, nice to see you, Zaneta, and nice to see you, Gabriela, and I'm very glad that I can be here.
And my second speaker is Gabriela Wiktorzak. She is a commercial lawyer at Linklaters. And those two wonderful experts decide to give us their time and experience and knowledge to share with us all legal tech matters. So a warm-up question. From the legal perspective, I'm wondering how AI is regulated right now. Do we have any special acts, norms, regulation that companies need to follow if they're thinking about starting with the AI solutions? Who wants to start? Because I have two Gabrielas. So
you know, I'm older, so maybe me will be the first. It's always a good reference point. Okay, to answer this question very simply, I would say no, we don't have any comprehensive regulations on AI, but it would be too simply to answer that because there are some regulations that are partially in Europe, partially in other countries in the world, and they mainly concern autonomous vehicles. And there are also some more international regulations about against autonomous weapon. So there is something, and of course we still have our laws in the European Union, in other countries, that may be sometimes suitable when we talk about AI. What I want to say is that many governments adopted also some strategies on AI. These documents are very different and different quality too. Some of them are very general, some of them are more specific. There are also special teams or committees responsible for drafting future regulations, like German Data Ethics Commission, Center for Data Ethics and Innovation in UK. And those initiatives are very important because they lead to some regulations in the future. And in my opinion, the most important documents on AI now, there are some guidelines or recommendation on ethical and trustworthy AI, because when we are talking about AI, it's always close. Law and ethics, they're very close to each other. So most of the documents on ethical AI are produced by private companies. It's more than 20%. They are followed by governmental agencies. It's also about 20%. And then we have also academic and research institutions. It's more than 10%. And there are many other entities all over the world that produce such documents. But the problem with regulating AI is that it's quite pointless to do it on the national level. So the ideal situation would be to regulate AI similarly in the whole world, what is of course kind of utopia. So I believe that maybe European Union will be the first such big organization that proposed something. I base this belief on white paper on AI, and the other document, it's a report on the safety and liability implications of artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things and robotics. They are both made prepared by European Commission and issued February this year, and I think it may be a good basis for future regulation.
Okay, thank you. And Gabriela, are there any other norm acts?
No, I would just follow basically what Gabriela said. There's no AI specific legislation at this stage. It seems like all the decision makers are still trying to evaluate all different interests, because on one hand, we have the economic fairness, being competitive on the market, and on the other hand, we've got the public safety. And these seem to be the key considerations across the globe, including the States, who recently published some additional paperwork in relation to the way the regulations should be approached. But like I said, we still trying to figure out whether we should adopt the existing regulation and laws, or whether adopt something AI specific. I think the one of the most important challenges is the fact that law does not seem to keep up well with changes within technology, and putting something in place which might be a bit too specific might create some barriers when it comes to innovations. This was actually one of the reasons why in one of the white papers that was published this year in Japan by Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, that perhaps it's time to actually use a different paradigm. It's basically to move from a rules-based approach to goals-based approach. And it seems like in respect of such really quickly developing technologies, that might be the answer. However, just because we don't have an AI specific legislation doesn't mean that the companies are not able to use new technologies. I think that legal services in the UK actually have been taking advantage of AI platforms. This seemed to be in compliance, provided obviously that certain conditions are met, with the SRA Code of Conduct. As AI platforms are treated as IT systems and provided just like other outsourcing services. So it seems like legal services in the UK are coping well. Regardless of how this is going to be approached, there is no doubt that AI, new technologies will change our current laws when it comes to data protection, privacy, intellectual property, antitrust, data security. But for now, we just have to rely on what we have in place, together with the guidelines and frameworks that have been published, as Gabriela mentioned, on trustworthy AI.
Okay. So since we now, let's say, pretty much know that AI is not perfectly regulated, and companies want to start with AI, what are the most important legal issues that they should address at the beginning if they're thinking about machine learning or any others AI models? And now we can start with Gabriela again.
Well, I think that we have to understand that we have different perspectives here, because we have the supplier perspective, and actually a lot of companies already adopted their own AI policies on AI design, development, implementation, and these have been published on their websites. And I think this is really a responsible move, and also helps with creating customer client trust, and this is necessary in order to sell any product. As we all remember, the last AI winter happened. One of the reasons why it happened was basically due to the lack of public trust, and I think that's a great obstacle and something that needs to be addressed. When from a customer, client perspective, I think that a company that wishes to automate or augment any of their processes with AI needs to start at the very basis. I'm not going to go into detail when it comes to understanding the processes within the company. I think that's something that already been touched upon by the previous panel, but any process that's supposed to be automated needs to be very well understood by the company, and all associated risk with that process checked and risk assessed, especially when personal data is meant to be processed. And if AI is involved in personal data processing, that can create a lot of issues. I think one of the interesting examples was basically what the ICO ruling in terms of using personal data by Google DeepMind in their engagement partnership with Royal Free Hospital showed. Obviously, the hospital, one of the issues was the hospital basically breached data protection laws, but one of the audits that actually happened at the time showed that because of the complexity of AI, it might be the case that it would be the supplier, the provider, who would be actually determining the means of processing, which in a way suggests that it might make the supplier a controller, which is quite odd. Most circumstances, suppliers actually act as processors. So that's just the first actually issue that might show and needs to be obviously considered. Any company that wants to be successful when it comes to and compliant when it comes to implementing AI solutions would have to look at their own organization from the very beginning of the creating any risk and compliance policies and adopt privacy by design approach together with any processes in relation to constantly review what is happening when it comes to the processes. From the contractual perspective, it would obviously need to, the parties will have to address issues such as confidentiality, intellectual property, and data as well, because we need to remember that the AI tools use input data, but at the same time produce large amounts of data, output data. That second generation of data may be created using the input data, and in the input data there might be some rights of the data owners, and if there is no consent or a proper license, those rights might be infringed.
Okay, and you mentioned also the processes that need to be checked. Yes, and could you tell something more about due intelligence, how it works?
Well, due diligence, risk assessment would have to be implemented by the companies as per their needs, the processes, the risks involved, and obviously the available means. There are some great examples published this year. Actually, the assessment list for trustworthy AI would be probably a good starting point, as well as another self-assessment for organizations that was published also this year in Singapore, which contains a list of questions that the company should consider to ensure their AI governance is compliant with the Singapore model framework that was published like the previous year. So these are great actually cheating sheets, which could be implemented or used as an inspiration for the companies who are thinking about implementing smart tools that would really help them to, first of all, understand their own playground, and then ensure that they actually consciously and responsibly moving into more automated, innovative environment.
Okay, thank you. And Dr. Gabriela, from your perspective, what do you think, what legal issue companies should secure first when they're thinking about the AI?
I think this risk-based approach or impact-based approach is very important, but Gabriela said a lot about it, so I won't be repeating this. What I want to say that it's maybe easier for us in European Union because we know this approach from GDPR and Cybersecurity Act. So maybe European companies are more likely to do that, more likely to adapt this approach. If not, they should think about it, of course. This approach makes things easier, even there's no regulation, because we can assess within our organization if what we do and what we implement is really okay, not only for business, but of course for data subjects. So the second thing is, of course, data governance. I mean, the companies implementing AI solutions, they must take care about data they use, of course. They must be reliable data, unbiased from reliable sources, of course, because it's a big risk to not use proper data sets. And the third thing is a question of the future, but I hope that it will be soon introduced, at least in the European Union. So it will be very useful to have a system of conformity assessment and system of certification. So if company could enter into the process to receive, to achieve this certification, it would be great kind of assessment for themselves, but it will be also very good signal for people, for the audience, for other stakeholders that this company is compliant with some rules that must be abide by. And what I'm saying is a lot about transparency, explainability, traceability. So these ethical issues that are not really only ethical, in my honest opinion, some requirements about transparency and explainability should be implemented in legal regulations. Because these issues are important not only from the perspective of the end user, of the data subject, but it's also important from the point of view of the organization, because implementing these values in a very practical form, it allows to reduce the risk for liability, risk of liability for some damages, and on the other hand, it helps to foster the trust in AI, and if people trust in AI, that they will buy products with AI, that they will use AI, of course. So it's interesting. I've read recently studies about this ethical principles, and transparency is featured in about 90% of all documents produced about ethics in AI. So it seems that it's the most important guideline, most important criterion for AI systems. And of course, it encompasses data use, human AI interaction, automated decision making. So there are many aspects of this transparency. But because it is so important, and all organizations or companies that issue any ethical recommendation and ethical guidelines on AI, they underline the importance of this criterion.
Okay, and you talk a lot about transparency, and we know that everyone connected AI with the black box. This is a very hot topic, especially when we are thinking about AI and some decision-making process. Can we secure it somehow? How it's approached from the legal perspective to secure that?
Yeah, it's also a hot topic for me, because I'm very interested in this issues, transparency, explainability. What we have now as a more international regulation is GDPR. It touches somehow these issues, because in Article 22 of General Data Protection Regulation, within European Union at least, we have some restrictions for automated processing, including profiling. So data subjects, they are protected from being subject of, for example, electronic recruitment process without any human intervention. And the other requirements from this regulation is that if there is automatic processing, if there is automated decision making, the data subject must have proper explanation. So GDPR requires meaningful information about the logic involved in AI system. It's very important in the light of the right to appeal when the data subject wants to appeal from the decision made by AI. And there are many concerns about it, how to really perform this right, and of course how far we should go with the transparency, because there are also, on the other hand, we have IP rights and trade secrets. So some companies, they are afraid of showing what they have in this black box. But in my opinion, it's not a question of opening black box. I mean, even if we open black box, it still may be not relevant for data subject, because even having white box for non-specialists, for people that are not AI expert or that are not data scientists, seeing what is happening inside may be just black magic. They won't understand that. So, in my opinion, the most important thing to provide people with explanation, proper explanation, why such decision was made and what are real consequences of that. So, I think that it should be legal obligation to provide evidence of the parameters, instruction given as an input for AI and factors involved in predictions or decisions made by AI. And of course, there may be different levels of this explanation for different AI. If the AI is more sophisticated and has more influence in people's life, then explanation should be more detailed, especially in healthcare, in judicial system. It's crucial, to have good explanation.
Okay, and Gabriela, your thoughts, very short, about the black box?
I completely agree. I think that in cases where using AI tools may have profound impact on data subject rights and their prospects, there should be some accountability and transparency on a really high level, because that's really not only important from the point of view of ethics, but also from the fundamental human right to fair and due diligent process. And like I mentioned, companies need to remain accountable and be able to explain the decision that they are making.
Okay, thank you very much, girls. What do you recommend to the standard legal departments when they need to deal with AI?
Okay, maybe I'll start.
Yeah,
very shortly. So implementing, but really implementing risk-based or impact-based approach to AI issues. Follow the legislative activities in EU, because I think that EU is a leader in this field. But also monitor the recommendation issued by independent bodies like high-level expert group on artificial intelligence or Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers in the US. They have very interesting documents, recommendation on AI. And from my own practice, I think it's very important to be up to date, not only with the law, but also with technology, to understand technology and to know what is for, to implement it properly and to govern it properly.
And you, Gabriela?
I agree. Basically, just looking really closely, understanding your own processes, mapping it, making sure the data used is accurate, and have governance in place in order to ensure that that's actually happening. From the contractual perspective, I think we still can and should treat AI tools just like software. and data. So these are the basically two fundamental principles, and appropriate considerations would have to be made, and any issues and risk addressed in a contract with suppliers. Cybersecurity, obviously, and like I mentioned, adopting privacy by design type of approach, where we have continuous check-in and understanding, like infinite loop in DevOps model.
Okay, so thank you very much for this inspiring discussion. I think that you will need to find the time for all this question on the chat anyway. I hope that now the legal aspect is a bit clearer for all of you. Thanks a lot for viewing us. You can check our Y booths, and there you will find all information how to become our member. And thanks a lot. Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye bye.
Bye.